My parents kicked me out at 18 to move in my sister's boyfriend. Years later, they showed up asking for my help after her boyfriend abandoned her, and they retired broke. At 18 years old, I had my whole future ahead of me, or so I thought. That is until my parents made a decision that shattered everything. I had always been close to my family, but when it came time for me to leave home, they kicked me out without hesitation. Also, my sister's boyfriend could move in. It felt like betrayal, a cold and heartless act that left me with no choice but to fend for myself. Years passed, and I built a life far away from that toxic environment. But then, out of nowhere, my parents showed up at my door, asking for help. The same parents who had tossed me aside were now in desperate need. Her boyfriend had abandoned her, and worse, my parents had retired only to find themselves broke. I never expected to see them again, especially not asking for my help. But as they stood there, vulnerable and ashamed, I was forced to make a choice. Would I help them, or would I remind them of the pain they caused me? Growing up, I always believed that family came first. My parents raised me to value loyalty and respect, teaching me that blood was thicker than anything else in life. For years, I trusted them with my heart, believing we were a solid, unbreakable unit. My sister and I shared our childhood, and no matter how different we were, we always had each other. Or so I thought. When I turned 18, I was excited to start my adult life. I had just finished high school and dreamed of going to college, getting a job, and making something of myself. My plans, however, would soon be shattered. I never could have predicted the way my parents would treat me when it came time for me to spread my wings. Out of nowhere, I was told that I had to leave the house. There was no explanation, no conversation about my future. They said it was time for me to move on, and that I was no longer welcome to stay under their roof. They had their reasons, but it didn't make sense to me. What hurt even more was the fact that they were kicking me out for my sister's boyfriend, someone I had barely gotten to know. He had been living with us for a while, and I had never been comfortable with it, but my parents were insistent. The day I was kicked out, I felt like I had been hit by a ton of bricks. My parents' decision was final, and there was no room for discussion. They told me it was time for me to grow up, and that they needed space for my sister's boyfriend. It seemed unreasonable, but their words were firm and cold. I had no choice but to gather my things and leave. I spent the next few months living on my own, struggling to find my footing in a world that suddenly felt much colder. It wasn't easy, but it taught me valuable lessons about independence and resilience. I found a job, rented a small apartment, and began rebuilding my life from scratch. But even as I worked hard to establish my future, a part of me could never shake the anger and hurt from what had happened with my parents. As the years passed, I cut ties with them. I couldn't forgive them for the way they had treated me, and I was bitter about how they had chosen my sister's boyfriend over me. My family was supposed to be there for me, but I felt completely abandoned. And then, just when I had finally begun to move on, something unexpected happened. A few years after I moved out, I had finally found some semblance of peace. My life had started to come together. I had a decent job, a group of close friends, and my own place where I could live freely without the constant weight of my family's expectations. I had become accustomed to living on my own, and I no longer felt the anger that had once consumed me when thinking about my parents and sister. But deep down, I still carried a sense of loss. Then, out of nowhere, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my mom. After years of no communication, I didn't know what to make of it. She had always been the one to distance herself, and her sudden reach-out stirred a mix of emotions in me. I was unsure if I should even pick up, but something inside urged me to hear her out. "Can you come over?" she asked, her voice softer than I remembered. "We need to talk." I hesitated, my heart racing. After all these years, what could she possibly want from me? What could they want after abandoning me the way they had? But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. The meeting was set for the following weekend. When I arrived at their house, it was strange. Nothing felt the same. The house looked emptier, the rooms quieter. My parents had aged, and their once lively energy seemed drained. There was an awkwardness that hung in the air, a tension that I couldn't ignore. My mom was sitting on the couch, her eyes searching mine as though trying to find the words she had rehearsed for so long. "Your sister," she started, her voice trailing off, but she quickly regained composure. "She's in a bad place. Her boyfriend, he left her. He left her high and dry." I felt a jolt in my chest. My sister's boyfriend, the one who had taken priority over me all those years ago, had walked out on her. The same man who my parents had chosen over me. For a split second, I wondered if karma had finally caught up to him. But my emotions were conflicted. I didn't know if I should feel satisfaction or pity. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. My mom shifted uncomfortably. "We don't know who else to turn to. She's devastated. And honestly, so are we." She paused, looking me in the eye. "We don't have much left. We've retired, but we don't have enough to survive comfortably. We're struggling." I blinked, taken aback by her words. She had always been a little too proud, too independent to ask for help. But now, she was admitting the harsh reality of their situation. They had made all the wrong choices, and now they were left with nothing. Their once promising retirement was now a burden, and the house, well, it was no longer a home to them. "Why should I help you?" I couldn't help but ask, my bitterness from the past creeping back to the surface. "After everything you did to me, Why would I come to your rescue now? My mom's face tightened, and I could see the guilt in her eyes. She was struggling with her own regrets, and for the first time, it seemed like she understood how much damage their choices had caused. We made a mistake, she admitted quietly. We never should have chosen him over you. And now we're paying the price. But we're asking for your help, not just for us, but for your sister. She needs someone. She needs you. The last words hit me like a punch in the gut. After everything that had happened, my sister, who had never once reached out to me in all these years, was now the one who needed me. The girl who had been my rival in so many ways, the one who had always been the golden child in my parents' eyes, was now in pain. I sat there, absorbing everything. It felt surreal. My parents, who had treated me like an outsider, were now begging for my assistance, but they were doing it under the guise of needing me for my sister's sake. Was I supposed to just forget how they had turned their backs on me? Was I supposed to believe that they truly regretted what they had done? I told myself to be calm, to think before reacting. My parents were in a vulnerable position, and so was my sister. But the hurt was still there, gnawing at me. The feeling of being cast aside all those years ago still stung. I could see it now, the desperation in their eyes. And I could see the reality of the situation. My parents weren't just financially struggling, they were emotionally lost. As the conversation continued, they tried to explain how much they had missed me, how much they wished things had been different. But no matter how they tried to justify their actions, the past couldn't be erased. The years of silence and abandonment were too fresh, too painful to just let go of. And in my mind, I was left asking the question, could I really forgive them after all they had done? But that day, I made a decision I didn't know would change everything. The days after that meeting were a whirlwind. I went back to my own life, my mind consumed with the conversation I had had with my parents. I couldn't get their words out of my head. My mom's guilt, the desperation in her voice, the image of her aging, vulnerable. These were things I couldn't ignore. But there was still a wall inside me, built over years of pain and betrayal. I didn't know if I could lower that wall, or if it was even worth it. But then something happened. A phone call. From my sister. I hadn't spoken to her in years, and honestly, I hadn't missed the relationship we once shared. We had never been close, and after everything that had happened with our parents, I had no desire to reach out. But when her name flashed on my screen, I hesitated. Should I answer? Or should I let it go to voicemail, like I had done with so many calls in the past? The phone rang twice before I answered. Hello, I said cautiously. Hey, her voice came through, small and hesitant. It's me. I need to talk to you. I felt a pit form in my stomach. She sounded different, weak, maybe even a little defeated. It wasn't the same confident tone I had once known. I don't know what you want, I replied, my voice hard, but not without a hint of curiosity. We haven't spoken in years. What is it that you need from me? There was a long pause on the other end. And then she spoke. I know we've never gotten along, but I'm really messed up right now, she said, the words coming out in a rush. He left me. My boyfriend. And now everything's falling apart. I don't know what to do. I've tried reaching out to mom and dad, but they don't have anything. And honestly, I don't know who else to turn to. I listened, but I didn't know how to react. The anger and resentment I had felt toward her all these years made it hard to feel empathy. This was the same girl who had been the perfect child in my parents' eyes, the one who had pushed me aside without a second thought. Now, she was asking me for help. Why are you calling me? I asked. After everything, you think I'm the person who should help you? Where was the support when I needed it? Her voice cracked. I know. I messed up. But things are different now. I need you. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up the phone and walk away from it all, to stay in the life I had built for myself, far away from their dysfunction. But the sadness in her voice gave me pause. I hated myself for even thinking about it, but part of me couldn't just ignore her. Part of me couldn't let her spiral further into chaos without at least trying to help. Why don't you come over? I said, before I could second-guess myself. We can talk. I'm not promising anything, but we can talk. A soft sigh of relief came from the other end. Thank you. Thank you so much. That evening, she showed up at my door. She looked nothing like the confident, self-assured woman I had once known. She looked broken, fragile even. There was no trace of the life she had once had. Her clothes were worn, her face pale, and there was an exhaustion in her eyes that told a story of sleepless nights and stress. We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing exactly what to say. I could see how much she had been through, how much she had lost in such a short amount of time. It made me think of my parents' words, how they had talked about her struggle and how they had begged me to help. But still, a part of me felt cold. She had chosen her path. She had chosen to live a life that excluded me, a life that prioritized her boyfriend and her own desires. Now, when things had fallen apart, she wanted me to pick up the pieces. How did it all happen? I asked, finally breaking the silence. She looked at me with tears welling in her eyes. He left. He just walked out on me. Said he couldn't do it anymore. I didn't even see it coming. I was so blinded by everything, by him, by the life we had. And now I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. For a moment, I felt the faintest flicker of empathy. But then, I reminded myself of everything I had gone through. The years of being neglected, the feeling of being left behind. She had never been there for me. She had never reached out when I needed help, when I was struggling to pick up the pieces of my own life. Why should I be there for her now? But as much as my mind told me to shut her out, something inside me pushed me to listen. Maybe it was because deep down, I still had a heart that couldn't entirely ignore someone in pain. Or maybe, just maybe, I could finally be the person to offer her the kind of support that I had never received. I don't know how this is going to work, I said quietly, but I'm willing to try. I'll help you. But you need to understand, I can't just forget everything. You and Mom and Dad, you hurt me. You chose him over me. I can't just act like that didn't happen. She nodded, the tears falling freely now. I know. I can never make it up to you. But please, just don't leave me now. I don't know who else to turn to. The words hit me harder than I expected. The guilt, the responsibility, the sense of being the one to make things right, it all weighed on me. But at the same time, I knew what I had to do. I had to be there for her. Even if it meant putting my own feelings aside, even if it meant forgiving what had happened in the past. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something I could just brush off. But this was the moment I had been waiting for. This was my chance to step up, not as a child seeking validation, but as someone who had grown, someone who had learned the importance of family. And just like that, I made the decision. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. I didn't know exactly what I had signed up for, but I knew that there was no going back. I had agreed to help my sister, and now I had to navigate the complexities of a relationship that had been broken for years. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I felt overwhelmed. I had to remind myself why I was doing this, to give her the chance I never had. A chance to heal, a chance to rebuild. But the reality of the situation soon became clear. My sister was not the same person she had been before her boyfriend left her. The woman who had once been confident, independent, and even a little arrogant was now vulnerable, lost, and unsure of herself. It was a side of her I had never seen before, and it was difficult to accept. Every day was a struggle for her. She couldn't find steady work. The few jobs she had managed to secure were low-paying and unfulfilling. Her finances were in shambles, and she had lost most of her friends during her relationship with her boyfriend. The isolation was suffocating, and I could see how hard it was for her to come to terms with the fact that everything she had built was falling apart. But the hardest part for me was watching her avoid taking responsibility. She would blame her ex, blame her circumstances, and sometimes even blame me for not being there sooner. The resentment I had built up over the years bubbled to the surface, but I refused to let it take over. I had made a promise to myself and to her that I would help her, no matter what. It wasn't long before our parents came back into the picture. They had been in touch with my sister frequently, and soon enough, they were calling me again. They begged me to continue helping her, to be there for her in ways they could not. They had already given up on her. I could see that much. They had no more energy or resources to offer. I'll admit, part of me wanted to throw it all back in their faces, to remind them of how they had kicked me out, to remind them of the pain they had caused. But I didn't. I focused on my sister, on the life she had built, and now lost, and the chance I had to make a difference. I had learned over the years that holding on to resentment was only hurting me. I couldn't let it hurt my sister too. But even as I offered her support, even as I helped her navigate the difficult road ahead, there were moments when I doubted myself. Was I doing the right thing? Was I really helping her? Or was I enabling her to stay in a cycle of self-pity? It was difficult to tell. There were days when she seemed to make progress, and then there were days when it felt like she was slipping further and further away from the person she needed to become. One evening, as we sat together at the kitchen table, she looked at me with tearful eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," she said, her voice breaking. "I've lost everything. I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought I had it all. I thought I could handle it all." I could see the guilt and shame in her eyes. It was a look that mirrored my own when I had been at my lowest. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just asking for help. She was asking for forgiveness. She was asking for someone to show her that she could start over, that she could rebuild her life. "I know you've been through a lot," I said softly, "but you're not alone anymore. You don't have to do this by yourself. You don't have to keep running from your mistakes. You can start over. But you have to take responsibility for what's happened. You have to make a choice. And you have to stop blaming others for where you are." There was a long silence, but I could see the change in her. It wasn't immediate, but it was there. It was the first time in years that I felt like we were moving towards something real. Something that could actually bring us closer, not just in terms of family, but as human beings. Over the next few months, things began to shift. Slowly, my sister started to rebuild her life. She found a stable job. She started making amends with people she had hurt. And, most importantly, she began to take ownership of her mistakes. The process wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but it was progress. I could see her coming back to life, bit by bit. There were still moments of tension between us, old wounds that had yet to heal, but I no longer carried the weight of resentment. I realized that helping her didn't mean I had to forget the past. It just meant I had to be the person I had always wanted someone to be for me. Compassionate, patient, and willing to let go of the past for the sake of the future. My relationship with my parents, though, remained strained. They never truly understood the depth of the pain they had caused. They never fully acknowledged their role in the fracture between me and my sister. But I didn't need their approval to move forward. I had learned to live my life on my own terms, and I was finally beginning to feel at peace with my decisions. I still kept a distance from my parents, but I didn't carry anger toward them anymore. I simply knew that I had to prioritize my own healing, and that meant putting boundaries in place. It wasn't easy, but it was the right choice. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between family and your own peace? Let me know in the comments below, and if you were touched by this journey of family, forgiveness, and new beginnings, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon to never miss an update.